Acts chapter 15 is really an epicenter in the book of Acts, the monumental place where the church came together, the leadership of the church, to figure out what they were going to do about the explosive growth of the Christian movement in Gentile communities. It's interesting, as you'll note, that Christian Pharisees come forward. Pharisees often get a bad rap from us because of our reading of the gospel. But in fact, Christians are Pharisee, and their Christianity does not cause them to sway in any way from their Phariseeism. Now we have to remember, of course, that these early believers don't have a New Testament. All they have is an Old Testament. And interestingly, in Acts chapter 15, it is their Bible that they turn to. What's curious is that both sides of the debate have texts. No doubt the Christian Pharisees who say, we're grateful that all of these Gentiles are turning to Christ, but they need to also be circumcised. Those Christian Pharisees are reading Genesis chapter 17, in which God says to Abraham in verse 14, any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. They simply could not fathom a people of God that did not have circumcision as a key entrance requirement alongside faith in Jesus Christ. That's also what the book of Galatians is all about, that same debate. Christians who love Jesus reading Genesis and applying that verse we just read, and some other texts, particularly in Deuteronomy, in a very unilateral way. I want to suggest, though, that there are other Christians who eventually won the day at the Jerusalem Council. They are led by Paul, and they're not reading Torah, they're reading prophets. Specifically, with Jesus, I think, reading Isaiah 56, where the prophet says, let no foreigner who has bound himself to the Lord say, the Lord will surely exclude me from my people, his people. And let not any eunuch complain, I am only a dry tree. For this is what the Lord says to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant. To them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will not be cut off. If you read the Torah, especially the book of Deuteronomy, it says explicitly, eunuchs are always forever cut off from worshiping God and later on from worshiping in the temple. Isaiah goes on in verse 6. And foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord to serve him, to love the name of the Lord and to worship him, all who keep the Sabbath without desecrating it and who hold fast to my covenant. These I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. If you've read the Gospels, you probably remember that reference to the house of prayer. It was in the mouth of Jesus when he came to cleanse the temple. He was calling Isaiah's vision to come to pass. That's the debate going on in Acts chapter 15, a debate between texts and countertexts. And thankfully, the early Christian interpretation of the prophets won out.